May 16, 2022, 11:47 p.m., Azovstal Steel Plant, Mariupol, Ukraine. 2,500 Ukrainian fighters, 80 days underground, 6 kilometers of tunnels, Soviet-era bomb shelters beneath destroyed steel plant. Above them, 14,000 Russian troops, artillery, airstrikes, tanks, complete encirclement, no resupply, no reinforcements, no escape routes. The siege began February 24th. Mariupol fell in phases. City center, port, residential areas. By April, only Azovstal remained. Ukrainian forces retreated underground into Cold War bunkers designed to survive nuclear attack. Russians surrounded them, demanded surrender, began bombardment. Assault after assault. Nothing worked. Defenders held, against all logic, against all military doctrine. On May 16th, evacuation begins. Not surrender. Negotiated withdrawal. 2,500 fighters. Wounded. Starving. Out of ammunition. But undefeated. Russia claims victory. Ukraine claims successful defense. Both are right. Both are wrong. This is Military Report. And what happened at Azovstal wasn't siege warfare. It was something else entirely. Where 2,500 men held against force 6 times larger for almost 3 months. Where underground fortress designed for nuclear war proved invulnerable to conventional assault. Where Russia's inability to eliminate resistance trapped in basement became international embarrassment. And where question isn't whether defenders held. They did. Question is why Russia couldn't end it, and what that reveals about Russian military capabilities. The question isn't whether Azovstal defense was heroic. It demonstrably was. The question is how 2,500 fighters with no resupply survived 80 days against overwhelming force, and why Russia, with every tactical advantage, failed to eliminate resistance that couldn't escape, couldn't be reinforced, couldn't be resupplied. The answer reveals more about Russian military dysfunction than any battlefield defeat. Official Russian statements during siege. Triumphant. Azovstal will fall within days. Repeated weekly. For 11 weeks. Each deadline passed. Defenders remained. Embarrassment mounted. Eventually, Russia claimed victory when evacuation occurred. Called it surrender. Ignored that negotiated withdrawal isn't military defeat. Narrative control mattered more than facts. Ukrainian statements, defiant. Azovstal holds. Daily updates. Emphasized resistance continues. Spotlighted Russian failures. Made siege international story. Defenders became symbols. Heroes. Even when situation was hopeless, narrative victory was achievable. And narrative victory kept international support flowing. Stay with me, because the detail that explains Azovstal, how 2,500 men survived against 14,000, isn't about courage or determination. It's about Cold War engineering that created indestructible fortress and Russian tactical incompetence that couldn't adapt when conventional assault tactics failed against unconventional defensive position. That combination created siege that should have lasted days, but lasted months. Let's establish what Azovstal actually is. Why it's invulnerable to conventional assault. Azovstal Steel Plant. Built 1930s. Expanded Soviet era. Massive industrial complex. 11 square kilometers surface area. But surface doesn't matter. Underground does. During Cold War, Soviets built bomb shelters beneath plant, designed to survive nuclear attack. Reinforced concrete, 6 meters thick in places, multiple levels, kilometers of tunnels, independent ventilation, water supplies, designed for thousands of people, for months of isolation. This isn't basement. This is fortress, purpose-built for survival, against weapons far more powerful than anything Russia was using. Nuclear weapons, bunker buster bombs, chemical weapons, all anticipated in design, all countered. The shelters weren't meant to be comfortable, just survivable. That's what Ukrainian fighters inherited. Unintentional fortress that conventional weapons couldn't breach. Russian forces above had every advantage except one: couldn't reach defenders. Artillery destroys surface structures. Doesn't penetrate 6 meters of reinforced concrete. Airstrikes crater surface. Don't breach underground shelters. Tanks can't descend into tunnels. Infantry assaults into tunnels become killing grounds. Defenders know layout, have defensive positions. Attacker must advance through narrow passages into prepared ambushes. Russia tried everything. Thermobaric weapons. Massive explosives. Tunnel flooding attempts. Chemical weapons allegations, never confirmed, but defenders reported breathing difficulties suggesting possible gas attacks. Nothing worked. Bunkers held. Defenders survived. Russia's conventional military couldn't defeat Cold War engineering. February 24th, May 16th. The siege. What 2,500 men endured for 80 days. February 24th, March 1st. Initial invasion. Russian forces enter Mariupol from multiple directions. Heavy fighting. Ukrainian forces defend city but are outnumbered. Gradually withdraw toward defensive positions. Azovstal identified as fallback position. Civilian evacuation attempts. Some succeed. Many fail. Thousands of civilians remain trapped in Mariupol, including hundreds who shelter in Azovstal with fighters. March 1st, March 15th. Battle for Mariupol intensifies. Russian forces control most of city. Ukrainian forces consolidate at Azovstal and Ilyich Steel Plant. Both facilities have underground shelters. Both become defensive strongpoints. Russian artillery bombardment begins. Systematic destruction of city. Mariupol transforms into ruins. Ukrainian forces retreat further underground. March 15th, April 1st. Azovstal becomes last holdout. Ilyich plant falls. All remaining Ukrainian forces in Mariupol concentrate at Azovstal. Approximately 2,500 fighters, mix of regular military and Azov regiment, plus approximately 1,000 civilians in shelters. Food supplies limited. Medical supplies inadequate. Ammunition sufficient for defense but not offensive operations. Russian forces surround Azovstal completely. Offer surrender. Defenders refuse. Russia begins siege. Artillery bombardment continuous. Airstrikes daily. Ground assaults attempted. All fail. Defenders repel every attempt to enter tunnel system. Russian casualties mount. Attackers can't coordinate in confined spaces. Defenders have every tactical advantage underground. Russians stop trying to enter. Switch to containment and bombardment. April 1st, April 20th. Siege intensifies. Russia increases pressure. More artillery. More airstrikes. Attempts to destroy surface entrances. Some collapse. Others remain open. Defenders adapt. Move through rubble. Maintain defensive positions. Supplies dwindling. Food rationed. Water recycled. Medical supplies critically low. Wounded accumulate. No evacuation possible. Fighters treat each other with limited resources. Communications maintained. Starlink internet terminals. Defenders post updates. Videos. Messages to families. International attention increases. Azovstal becomes symbol of resistance. Pressure on Russia mounts. Let defenders evacuate. Allow humanitarian corridor. Russia refuses initially. Then offers conditional surrender. Defenders refuse. Stalemate. April 20th, May 16th. Final phase. Defenders are starving. Critically low on everything. Wounded, need hospital care impossible to provide in bunkers. But still fighting. Still holding. Russia can't force surrender without unacceptable casualties from tunnel assault. Negotiations begin. Back channel. Eventually mediated by Turkey and UN. Terms discussed. Not surrender. Evacuation. Fighters allowed to leave. Become prisoners of war. But recognized as combatants, not criminals. This distinction matters legally. May 16th. Evacuation begins. Fighters emerge. Gaunt. exhausted, wounded, but walking out on their own, not captured in assault, not surrendered in defeat, negotiated withdrawal. Russia claims victory, got defenders out of Azovstal. Ukraine claims success. Defenders survived 80 days against overwhelming odds. Both spin narrative to their advantage. Now the analysis. Why this happened. What it means. Russian tactical failures. Couldn't adapt to unconventional situation. Doctrine emphasizes artillery and maneuver. Neither works against underground fortress. Required specialized assault tactics. Tunnel warfare. Room clearing. Russia lacks training and equipment for this. Attempts failed. Casualties mounted. Eventually gave up on military solution. Accepted negotiated outcome. This reveals critical capability gap. Defensive advantages. Cold War bunkers are invulnerable to conventional assault. By design, Ukrainian fighters exploited this perfectly. Didn't try to hold surface. Withdrew underground. Forced Russians to come to them. Into tunnels. Into killing grounds. Russians couldn't. Wouldn't. Cost was too high. So siege became containment. And containment became embarrassment as weeks passed without resolution. International pressure. Defenders maintained communications throughout siege. Kept story alive. International community demanded humanitarian corridor. Evacuation of wounded. Russia initially refused. But pressure accumulated. Eventually, continuing siege cost more politically than negotiated evacuation. Russia accepted terms. Not because military situation forced it. Because political cost exceeded benefit. Strategic impact. Azovstal tied down 14,000 Russian troops for 3 months. Troops needed elsewhere. Artillery ammunition expended on bunkers could have been used on actual military targets. Airstrikes wasted on invulnerable concrete. Resource misallocation was catastrophic. All to eliminate 2,500 fighters who posed no offensive threat. Russia chose prestige over strategy. Cost was immense. 3 questions from the beginning. Time to answer them. How did 2,500 fighters survive 80 days with no resupply? Cold War bunkers. Designed for extended isolation. Had water. Had ventilation. Food was rationed severely, but lasted. Ammunition sufficient for defense. Medical supply. Soviet engineers built fortress that couldn't be breached conventionally. Defenders exploited this. Survival wasn't heroic endurance alone. It was engineering advantage that negated Russian firepower superiority. Why didn't Russia just seal them in? Tried. Couldn't. Tunnels too extensive. Collapse some entrances. Defenders use others. Plus, international pressure demanded humanitarian resolution. Sealing fighters in means civilians die too. Approximately 1,000 civilians in bunkers. Russia couldn't justify that internationally. Also, prestige. Putin wanted surrender, not starvation. Surrender proves Russian victory. Starvation is atrocity. Political calculations prevented military solution. What does Azovstal reveal about Russian military? Catastrophic tactical inflexibility. Can't adapt when conventional tactics fail. Lack specialized capabilities for unconventional situations. Tunnel warfare. Urban operations. Room clearing. All inadequate. Wasted enormous resources on militarily irrelevant target for prestige. Reasons. Tied down 14,000 troops for 3 months, achieving nothing strategic. This is institutional dysfunction manifesting as tactical failure. The lesson from Azovstal is that modern military power has limits. Russia has artillery, has air power, has numbers, but couldn't eliminate 2,500 men in basement. Because Russian military lacks capability to fight effectively in confined spaces against prepared defenders. Technology and firepower don't solve all problems. Sometimes problems require capabilities you don't have. This is MilitaryReport. We analyze the battles that define wars. And Azovstal defines modern Russian military's fundamental limitations, where overwhelming force meets immovable defense, where prestige demands victory that capability can't achieve, where 14,000 troops fail to eliminate 2,500 because tactical situation doesn't favor attacker and adaptation is impossible. That's not military effectiveness. That's institutional rigidity encountering unconventional challenge it can't solve. The defenders who emerged May 16th were prisoners, eventually exchanged. Some returned to Ukraine. Some remain in Russian captivity. But Azovstal became legend, symbol of resistance, proof that determination and defensive advantage can negate numerical superiority. Whether that's accurate or romantic narrative doesn't matter. Story became more powerful than facts. Russia got Mariupol. Eventually, but took 3 months to eliminate final resistance in one building complex. Cost in resources was enormous. Cost in prestige was worse. Russia can't defeat 2,500 fighters in basement became international narrative. Accurate. Damaging. Impossible to counter because true. Subscribe to Military Report. Because in modern warfare, tactical flexibility matters more than firepower. Azovstal proved this. 2,500 men held 80 days because they had defensive advantage and Russia couldn't adapt. That's not David versus Goliath. That's fortress warfare where attacker lacks siege equipment. Outcome was inevitable. Russia couldn't win militarily, only politically, through negotiation. That's victory that looks like defeat, and defeat that looks like victory. Perspective determines interpretation. 80 days, 2,500 fighters, 14,000 besiegers, fortress designed for nuclear war, conventional assault that couldn't breach it, negotiated evacuation that both sides claimed as victory. That's Azovstal, most famous siege of 21st century. Proof that sometimes defense really does have advantage. When engineering and terrain favor defender. When attacker can't adapt. When prestige demands victory capability can't achieve. Result is months-long stalemate that ends in negotiation, not conquest. If you think Azovstal was heroic last stand, type Military Report in comments. If you think it was fortress that couldn't be breached conventionally, tell me which is more important, heroism or engineering. Because both are true, both mattered. Neither alone explains 80 days. Only combination does. Real battles, real tactics, real consequences. Stay informed.